So I'm not really here today. I can talk afterward, but I'm not here today to talk about my entrepreneurial ventures. I am here today to talk about something that was a bit of an epiphany that I had at the Economist Conference, really inspired by a session I did at Burning Man. And interestingly enough, it was when my book and my story hit the cover of Yahoo.com that I got to thinking about it. And I was ridiculed heavily because my book is titled How I Went From a Gang Member to a Multimillionaire. And I was ridiculed heavily by people who knew my story because I was blessed to receive a mentor. And people said, oh, he hit the lottery, it's not duplicatable. And I was heavily criticized because I went from being a legitimate gang member with gang tattoos and a Los Angeles gang background to living the lifestyles of the rich and famous. And it's real easy to say because I was given the gift of a mentor, and it was because of that. And then the thesis was, is that duplicatable? So I'm here today to tell you that I think I found a solution to some of our nation's greatest problems, or potential problems for that matter. So it was inspired by seeing the London riots occur. For those of you familiar, there was $1 billion worth of rioting that happened in London, and this is my article in the Financial Times. Now the reason why I'm qualified to talk about that was because I was a Los Angeles rioter, which meant I knew exactly what it was like to see civil unrest lead to the looting and rioting of entrepreneurs. At first, it seemed like a class issue, meaning a black man in Los Angeles was beaten and in London was killed, and there was a revolt. But then when you realize who was actually rioting, well, it was all races and ethnicities. And then it looks like a wealth issue. Well, in Los Angeles, it spread to all communities, not just the poor communities. And in London it was as well. So I started thinking deeper, what is the real issue? The symptoms are race or class, but what's the real issue? And everyone now says it's jobs. It's interesting though, because when you look at what's happened in the revolts of the youth, which is the topic of my title, How to Save Jobless Youth from Revolting, or before they revolt rather, it looks like it's a jobs issue. And you look at Egypt being overthrown, you look at the London riots, and you look at our jobless rate today, and the amount of youth that are unemployed, 44% of African American males, 24% of Caucasian males, the most mobilely connected group of youth ever. That there's a large amount of disenfranchised sentiment, and we should all be scared, particularly for entrepreneurs, because guess whose buildings they burn down, and guess whose companies they destroy in the process. So today's speech is called Saving Today's Jobless Youth Before the Revolt, a perspective from a former revolutionist, or reformed revolutionist. I still consider myself one, and I'm in fact revolutionizing the direct selling industry and the technologies that we innovated and the things that we do. We all try to create revolutions, so you'll have to forgive me. I identify with the subject of being a revolutionist, but now one for good as opposed to one for bad. One of the reasons why I was excited to speak at TED was because I saw the author of Freakonomics had a quote. He said, being in a gang is the worst job in America, to paraphrase it. And that was in 2004, and my refutation of that is, unfortunately, there's not a lot of jobs in America for people. So it might be the worst job in America, but if it's the only job, you're going to take it. And being a gang is really just a startup. In fact, a gang in some cases is a mature business, and every day, by recruiting new individuals, you're recruiting new entrepreneurs to start up companies within your gang. Very similar to the traditional corporate infrastructure that occurs all around us. So being in a gang isn't a job, it's an illegal business with a new startup recruits every day, launching every day, run by very talented people who are just disenfranchised and jobless, meaning they have no hope. And I'm going to give you the path of how I went from being a normal middle-class kid to being in a gang to now living in wealth and trying to help a lot of disenfranchised youth out of the current system. That's me in the middle class. My father was an engineer, hence the reason why I have a propensity for the art of engineering, and science rather. He was involved in the drug trade. And it first started out with him growing marijuana, and that was a family trade, and then led to him getting involved in harder drugs. By the time I was, when I was 5 years old, I knew how to harvest marijuana, I knew how to hide our family's business, and when I was 13 years old, I lost my father, my mother, my brothers, to a variety of crimes. From my father disappeared, my mother became a drunk. Well, one of my brothers went to prison for armed robbery, as did the other. My other sister got involved in drugs, and she's still, actually she's in prison today. So I'm an expert in what can happen to a family when they get involved in the drug trade, and what happens to the youngest child of that family, which I was, when that happened. So I had no real family stability, no authority, no parental guidance whatsoever at 13 years old. Now a lot of people, you know, they see me as a clean cut or semi-clean cut guy, and they go, that's impossible. So I brought some props for you, but this was the house my mom and I went into. It's hard to see from there. There was a one-bedroom shack, you know, filled with rats and lice and everything else, in a gang-infested environment. This was me when I was first recruited into the gang. You'll see me back there. These are individuals, many of which are doing life in prison today for a variety of crimes. And this was me when I was in what's called a continuation high school. Now, all throughout the United States, we have what are called alternative and continuation high schools. This is where, in Los Angeles, or in California in particular, they send the bad kids to learn how to become really bad kids. And I have a thesis, though, because forever I was mad at the traditional education system, because I was bypassed from it. I have entrepreneurial talents, I have the ability to think mathematically, but I had such anxiety in testing and such family-related issues, I could never test. So I was completely misidentified academically, and because I was constantly transferred from home to home, I was never able to, or city to city rather, I was never able to really athletically be identified, so I didn't have a coach or an academic program. So the one-size-fits-all education system literally shits out, excuse my French, people like me, who are highly talented, highly trained, just going through issues. Now, the interesting thing about that is because we are trained to lie by our families, meaning our parents train us to lie, meaning if you tell the neighbors, the police, or anyone that dad is an abuser or a drug dealer, or that mom is a drunk, or whatever the case is, you will be removed, right? You will be taken away, right? That's the constant threat in our society. We're trained to lie to prevent the family from being destroyed. I actually went to a principal in the 8th grade and told my family's secret, and that's what prompted my dad to disappear, my mother to go into deep drunken depression, and my brothers and sisters to disband. So, the threat was held true, and in fact, that threat is what the education system cannot see. It can see my test scores, it can see I'm disruptive in class, it can see I'm seeking attention, but when it interviews me, or interviews my sisters, or interviews my parents, they say everything's fine, we just don't know why Ryan's acting up. And the reason why Ryan's acting up is because the entire family is trained liars. So I'm going to explain to you why this is an important piece of information, and why I now see the one-size-fits-all education system as the perfect opportunity to actually work with potential problems before they become them. For those of you who don't understand what continuation is, I'm going to give you some facts. But for those of you who go, well, how bad was Ryan's criminal activity? I brought with you my arrest record.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So for those of you who said, was he just involved in petty crime, or what was he really up to? This is the actual arrest record that tracked my neighborhood and many of the crimes that my family was involved in. The first one, though, that I'll tell you, the first one that I'll tell you was the one that sent me into it. Was my sister's best friend was killed in a drive-by shooting on the street that we grew up in. And there's a bit of loyalty and allegiance to your neighborhood. And when something like that happens, there's a call to arms, a call to recruiting, to avenge it, and certainly to protect it, right? So when Jennifer was murdered, Jennifer was my first crush, my first kiss, and my sister's best friend. So when she was murdered, it sparked a number of other crimes and violence, for example. All of which are in here. Now, I don't bring this around to glorify it, but there's a number of murders in there. There's a number of different acts of violence and acts of crime, all of which our society is deathly afraid of, literally, as we should be. But I'm here to tell you that there's a pattern, or an actual data pattern, that I've discovered using me as the model in the continuation high school systems as a way to actually identify, one, who could create the largest potential problem, a riot, or an organized crime ring, or an organized gang for that matter, and how to see what their data record looks like, so that way we can recruit them, not prosecute them. So that's really the idea of the foundation I put together, my work with Urban Born, and my philanthropic endeavors. That's my continuation high school senior year picture. I did not graduate from high school until later on, after I had my first mentor. A short fact about continuation is 13% of continuation high schools admit to carrying a gun to school. 14% admit to being in a gang. I want to put an emphasis on the word admit, right? I never admitted to either of those two things until I was long gone, reformed, and willing to admit to them. And in fact, my admittance to them has me here today and working on this thesis. In in California, and I'll use this as our model, but it mirrors in alternative schools throughout the United States and throughout any Western education. You have 519 continuation high schools, 116,000 kids. Roughly 5% of the one-size-fits-all system gets spit out into continuation high schools. So, and this is according to a Berkeley Law study, and for those of you familiar with Berkeley, they are not a continuation high school. My thesis was derived from a combination of events, but it was really a TEDx event at Burning Man. For those of you familiar with what Burning Man is, that I got to sit there and actually think about it. I was at Burning Man, I see this TEDx event, and I said, I got to do this speech. What's it going to be about? And so I sat there at Burning Man for a few days, thinking to myself, from the Burning Riots to the Burning Man, to prevent the riots of burning men. And what that means is, burning men are really men without fathers. And a man without a father, or a boy like I was, is a man without a mentor. And without a mentor, you don't learn. Even if you have a good mother, as I did, or a mother trying her best, she is not going to be able to steer that social unrest within her son and soothe her son for that matter. So my mission is to solve the problems that our society faces before they occur by identifying the people that have a similar data pattern to myself, and then rescuing them, so to speak, by giving them an education as I was, and proving that my success can be duplicated. You with me? That's the thesis. So that's what my mentor first gave me, a set of goals. Something I'd never heard of in the public education system. Can you believe that? They don't teach goals. And I could go on forever about that, but once I started having goals, and then I trained my addicted personality toward getting fired up by small incremental success. Next thing you know, I built companies that are valued at hundreds of millions of dollars and soon to be billions, and I've done a lot of great things, starting with incremental doses of success or goals, something that is profoundly not taught in the public school system, but certainly taught in families where there are good fathers. So my thesis, the mindset of the working poverty actually matches that of the working rich much more than the working middle class. Because I saw the middle class, and then I got to see poverty, and then I got to see rich, and my mentor, poverty and the wealthy are exactly the same animal. They just have a path to legal enterprise versus illegal enterprise. So the irony is the middle class tend to really do nothing, where the poor tend to be moving and trying to make progression, as are the rich. And the working rich are the ones that are progressing, where the sitting on their inheritance rich are the ones kind of sitting around, and then you have the working and hustling poor versus the sitting on their hands poor. So very similar situation. The one-size-fits-all education system actually spits out the problem, and if you know where the problem is, you can create solutions for it. That's what us entrepreneurs do. And my solution is target the biggest potential liabilities with intent to recruit, not prosecute. Teach them to be better businessmen, meaning legal businessmen versus illegal businessmen, right? Because I think if I was given the right path, and I was told that I could be a billionaire with the survival skills and instincts and so forth that I'd learned in the neighborhood I would take the right path. I believe human nature will generally take the right path when presented with an opportunity. Dispel the rags to riches story. I'm sick of hearing how we should admire Jay-Z, Diddy, me for that matter, because we went from rags to riches. No, we did the exact same thing that the rich do. We went and worked, or at least the working rich for that matter, and we earned our keep, and as a result, we're able to lead organizations and build businesses and dominate industries, as the examples I've given you have. So I'll share it with you. It wasn't something that happened immediately. It wasn't like I had a mentor and I showed up with $1 million idea and next thing you know I'm rich. This is my 1978 Toyota Corolla station wagon with wood paneling on the sides and my wardrobe from Ross Dress for Less as I went to my first day at work that I never have. I'm going to see if I can give you the data on this slide, but here's how you solve the problem. So I'm going to get to brass tacks here and my call to action. One, you analyze the data. We're looking at the school data, the family data, the criminal data, and the investigation data. So I've been talking with folks at the FBI, for example, with the thesis that we're going to recruit, not prosecute. We can look at the investigative data, the school data, the family data, the tuition information, the grade information, and we can try to target those people doing things that are money motivated. Because if you look at a series and a pattern of money motivated crimes, you probably have a person that are influencing even crimes that aren't money motivated, some of the ones that scare us, like murders and crazy crimes. Because when you think about it, you interview these folks, generally there's somebody at the top of the gang or the hierarchy that is money motivated, that is influencing crimes that are seemingly not money motivated. So we take the talent out of the hood. And we're looking for crimes money motivated, we recruit and prosecute. The price tag in California, I think I can literally take the talent pool, focusing on the data that I've talked about, and getting these kids mentors. I think it's about 3 kids per school, times a mere 500 some odd schools. So you're looking at 1,500 kids and about $2 million a year, right? Now we see all these one-size-fits-all contributions to our education, and I think that's just stupid money spent. The education system does a fine job. Put the money where the problem is. What's the ROI for those people that are interested in ROI? Well, the London riots is $1 billion problem. So for $2 million, you solve a big potential problem. The LA riots were $1 billion problem, but if you adjust it for today's inflation and cost of real estate and cost to actually rebuild, it would be in the tens of billions of dollars. And so I'm giving my fellow entrepreneurs the first right of refusal to invest in what I believe are some of the brightest entrepreneurial minds that our planet has to offer. So for those of us who are in the seed capital industry and looking for talent, much like my mentors have done with me, I think the greatest talent, untapped talent pool, is in those continuation high schools if we look at the data and we get the support from our fellow entrepreneurs to educate them and roll up our sleeves. And I believe that the ROI is substantial. That's my wish, and I'm hoping to get a lot of people to help me fulfill it. And my foundation is certainly going to do a lot of work in the California area to solve the problem here. That's it.